The smell of burnt sugar still lingered in the small bakery on a narrow London street when Helen Marsh wiped down her counter for the night. Her hands were red from kneading dough, and her fringe stuck to her forehead with a mix of flour and sweat. Outside, December wind rattled the window panes, and the sign Marsh and Daughters Bakery clinked softly. 3 days left until rent was due. No savings, no orders coming. Then her phone buzzed. Emergency, call me now. It was Hannah, her half-sister, the one who had always known how to sound both desperate and demanding. I need you tonight, she said breathlessly. What now? Helen sighed. A client, a date. Actually the date, Sir Nicholas Stone. You've heard of him, haven't you? Helen frowned. No? CEO of Stone Ventures, billionaire, widower. I was booked to meet him, but something bigger came up. You go instead. Helen froze. I can't just pretend to be you. You'll manage. Just smile. Don't talk too much and don't say anything stupid. He probably won't even turn up. They say he's bringing his little girl along. A child. Helen looked around her empty bakery, the cracked tiles, the fading chalkboard with buy one get one cupcake written in shaky letters. Maybe, she thought, she really didn't have much left to lose. All right, she murmured finally. But if he asks, I tell the truth. Fine, just don't ruin it. That evening, the restaurant, the Golden Pheasant, gleamed like a promise Helen couldn't afford. Gold lights, crystal glasses, people who looked like they had never known the sound of an empty stomach. She tugged at her only dress, navy blue, one sleeve slightly uneven, and walked in. Then she saw him. Nicholas Stone, tall, calm, in a charcoal suit that seemed to command the room. But what held her gaze wasn't him, it was the small hand gripping his. A girl of maybe 4, with chestnut curls and cautious brown eyes. For a moment Helen forgot to breathe. This was already going terribly wrong. When Nicholas looked up, their eyes met. She stepped forward, heart pounding. Mr. Stone, she began, I believe I'm here for dinner, but there's something I should say first. He studied her, curious. I'm not the woman you were supposed to meet. Silence, then. To her shock, he smiled. Not the polite smile of a man with money, but something warm, human. Then maybe, he said softly, I've finally met the right one. And in that instant, surrounded by chandeliers and strangers, something shifted, quietly, irreversibly. Helen had never felt so out of place. The linen tablecloths looked too white, the silverware too heavy, and every whispered laugh in the Golden Pheasant sounded like it was about her. She wanted to run back to her flour-dusted counter, to the smell of cinnamon and burnt sugar, but Nicholas Stone had already pulled out a chair. Please, he said simply. Stay. My assistant insisted I try this whole dating thing again. And my daughter? He looked down at the little girl beside him. Wanted to see the aquarium next door. The child didn't speak. She just looked around with wide, careful eyes, her tiny fingers clutching the edge of the tablecloth. Helen forced a smile and sat down. What's her name? Amelia, he said, almost reverently. For a while, no one spoke. The clinking of glasses, the rustle of expensive suits. It all felt like noise from another planet. Helen stared at the menu. Words like carpaccio and saffron foam blurred together. I'm sorry, she whispered finally. I'm not good at this. At dinners where I'm not serving the food. Nicholas glanced up. A flicker of surprise, then amusement. You're doing perfectly well. Amelia looked up too, studying Helen with the same quiet curiosity. When her meal came, something neat and colorful, she barely touched it. Nicholas sighed softly. Try it, sweetheart. She shook her head, eyes fixed on her plate. Helen hesitated. Then gently she rolled a grape from her own dish toward Amelia's. This one's a bit cheeky, she whispered. It says you can't catch it. For a second, nothing. Then, a small giggle. The girl nudged the grape back, her smile shy but real. Nicholas watched, still and silent. Something softened in his face, something that hadn't been there for a long time. When the dinner ended, Helen rose awkwardly. I should go. Early start tomorrow. Before she could move, a tiny hand reached out. Amelia's hand, warm and certain. Helen froze. Nicholas's voice was low, uncertain. She's never done that before. Not with anyone. Helen felt a tremor run through her chest. She didn't know what this evening was, mistake, fate, or something fragile in between. But she knew one thing. The child's touch was real. Nicholas hesitated, then said, Please, stay a moment. Just a walk. The park's quiet this time of night. And so they went. The three of them, a weary baker, a man who'd forgotten how to smile, and a little girl rediscovering laughter. The city lights flickered on the Thames, the wind smelled of wet leaves and promise. Helen walked beside them, thinking how strange life could be. How sometimes you walked into the wrong story and found exactly where you were meant to be. 2 days later, as London shook off another grey morning, Nicholas Stone stood in his glass-walled office high above Canary Wharf. Below him, the Thames glimmered faintly, but the city felt colder than ever. His assistant droned on about meetings and mergers, yet his mind was elsewhere, on the strange woman who had sat across from him 2 nights ago, the baker who wasn't meant to be there. When he returned home that evening, Amelia was already asleep on the sofa, a half-open backpack beside her. Her crayons had spilled across the carpet. Absent-mindedly, Nicholas crouched to gather them, then noticed something folded between her sketchbook and a biscuit wrapper, a crumpled page covered in smudged color. He unfolded it carefully. 3 stick figures. 1 tall man, 1 small girl, and 1 woman with yellow hair in a blue dress. Over their heads, in uneven letters, was a single word, Helen. Nicholas froze. His chest tightened, the room suddenly too still. His daughter, who hadn't spoken a full sentence in nearly a year, had drawn a family. The paper trembled in his hands. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like a CEO. He just felt like a father. And a man who'd forgotten how to feel anything at all. That weekend, when the doorbell of Marsh and Daughters Bakery rang, Helen was turning the sign to closed. She looked up, startled. Outside stood Nicholas, a modest bouquet of sun-yellow gerberas in one hand and a note tied around them. Amelia says hello. Helen blinked, her throat tight. She hadn't expected to see him again. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. I wanted to, he replied simply. It made her smile. He glanced around the small shop, flour-dusted counters, mismatched chairs, the scent of cinnamon and sugar in the air. You made her smile, he added quietly. In the days that followed, they kept crossing paths, once at the park, then outside a bookshop, then near Amelia's school, always by chance, or perhaps not. Each time, Amelia grew a little braver, her laughter a little louder. Nicholas listened to stories he hadn't realized he'd needed to hear, about simple things. Burnt tarts, early mornings, the kindness of regulars who paid late but meant well. Helen never spoke about her struggles. She just smiled, the kind of smile that carried dignity instead of despair. And that somehow made Nicholas want to stay a little longer each time. That night, when Helen closed her bakery alone, she found herself standing by the window watching the city lights flicker through the rain. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. Rain hammered softly on the windows of Marsh and Daughters Bakery that Saturday morning. The smell of cinnamon and melted butter filled the narrow space, wrapping it in warmth that the world outside seemed to have forgotten. Helen stood at the counter shaping dough with the calm rhythm of someone who had learned to find peace in repetition. The bell above the door chimed. She looked up, and there they were. Nicholas, hair damp from the drizzle, and little Amelia clutching a small paper bag. "She's been talking about your cakes all week," Nicholas said with a shy half-smile. "Talking?" Helen raised an eyebrow. "I didn't think she—" "Ah, no talking," he interrupted gently. "But insisting. She wanted to help you bake today." Helen blinked. "Bake?" Amelia nodded solemnly, eyes wide with expectation. 10 minutes later, the billionaire's daughter stood on a stool, hands deep in flour, face streaked with icing sugar. Nicholas watched from the corner, sleeves rolled up, looking less like a CEO and more like a man remembering how to breathe. "Be gentle," Helen told Amelia, stirring the mixture. "The dough listens, you know. If you're rough, it sulks." The little girl giggled, a sound so light and bright that it startled them both. She stirred, slower now, whispering something to the bowl as if to reassure it. When the first tray of cinnamon rolls went into the oven, the air filled with the smell of home, of warmth, patience, and quiet joy. Helen wiped her hands, turned, and found Nicholas watching her. Not the way men sometimes watched women, but as if he were seeing sunlight after months of fog. Then suddenly a small voice broke the silence. "Yummy." The word was soft, trembling, but real. Nicholas froze. Helen did too. For a heartbeat, no one moved. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Nicholas whispered, voice cracking. Amelia looked up at him with a shy grin, flour on her cheeks. "Yummy." He dropped to his knees, pulling her gently into his arms. His shoulders shook as he held her close. Helen turned away, covering her mouth, her own eyes brimming. It had been nearly a year since Amelia had last spoken, and now, in a tiny bakery that smelled of cinnamon and courage, she had found her voice again. When Nicholas looked up, tears still glistening, he said only one thing. "Thank you." Helen shook her head, whispering, "Don't thank me. Just don't stop believing she can heal." Later, when they left, she noticed an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single paid invoice from her flour supplier. Her debt cleared. At the bottom, a note written in clean, deliberate handwriting. "So you never stop baking. N." She stared at it for a long moment, torn between anger and gratitude. Finally she smiled, whispered into the quiet, "Then I won't." The weeks that followed felt almost unreal. Helen's bakery, once silent and cold, now hummed softly with life. Nicholas and Amelia would stop by most mornings, sometimes for pastries, sometimes just to say hello. Neighbors had started returning, drawn in by the smell of cinnamon rolls and something warmer still, joy. One Thursday afternoon, as Helen was frosting cupcakes for a local charity event, the door swung open with a sharp jingle. The air changed before she even looked up. Hannah. Her sister stood there like a ghost from another life, polished, expensive, perfectly composed. A tight red dress, designer bag, lipstick that gleamed like lacquer. "Well, look at you," Hannah said, her voice sweet and cutting all at once. "Still wearing flour like perfume." Helen's hands paused mid-air. "What are you doing here?" "Just checking on my little sister. You've been visible lately." Hannah held up her phone, the screen glowing. Photos? Helen at the park with Nicholas, smiling beside Amelia standing under fairy lights at a charity stall. "London's talking," she added. "The baker and the billionaire. You've become a story." Helen exhaled slowly.
You asked me to go to that dinner, Hannah. I didn't plan any of this. Oh, please. Hannah's tone sharpened. Don't act innocent. Do you think I don't know what you're doing? The poor girl fairy tale. The quiet act. Letting him pity you until he decides to play savior. Helen's fingers tightened on the piping bag. It's not like that. Isn't it?
You've always wanted what I had. The attention, the doors that opened for me. Helen turned, finally meeting her sister's gaze. Her voice was steady, almost calm. You had the doors. I had the locks to clean. Don't make this about sacrifice, Hannah hissed. You were born to be background noise, Helen. Don't mistake sympathy for love. The words hit like glass shattering on tiles. For a long moment, the only sound was the steady hum of the fridge. Then Hannah laughed, low, brittle. Enjoy your crumbs of happiness while they last. She turned and left, the bell above the door jangling after her. Helen stood there, trembling, the scent of sugar turning bitter in her throat. Slowly she looked up at the wall behind the counter, at the child's drawing Nicholas had framed for her. 3 stick figures, a man, a woman, and a little girl holding hands. Beneath it, in Amelia's uneven scrawl, one word, Helen. She reached out and touched the glass. Background noise, she whispered. We'll see about that. That night, she wrote a simple message to Nicholas. I need to focus on the bakery for the holidays. Thank you for everything. Take care of each other. Then she put her phone face down before she could change her mind. The message came early in the morning. Nicholas read it while the kettle whistled, eyes fixed on the glow of the screen. Helen's words were short, polite, final. I need to focus on the bakery. Take care of each other. He stood there for a long time, motionless. The toast burned. Amelia's cereal went soggy. The silence in the house stretched until it filled every room. At first he told himself it was for the best. He had work, obligations, a company that didn't pause for heartbreak. But by the 3rd evening, when he found Amelia sitting by the window still wearing the pink apron Helen had given her, he realized something far worse. He wasn't the only one hurting. Sweetheart, he said gently, kneeling beside her. Bedtime. She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the dark glass. In her lap lay a folded piece of paper. The drawing she'd made months ago. 3 stick figures, hand in hand. But now the paper was ripped, torn clean down the middle. The child in the picture stood between 2 halves that no longer touched. Nicholas's throat tightened. Where did you get that? He whispered. Amelia didn't speak. Instead, she turned the pieces face down and began pressing them together with strips of tape. Clumsy, crooked, determined. When she was done, she looked up at him with wet lashes and said the first word she'd spoken in days. Fixed. He swallowed hard. Yes, my love, fixed. But it wasn't. Not yet. That night, after he put her to bed, he found himself standing at the window, the city lights blurring into something like regret. He remembered the smell of Helen's bakery, cinnamon and calm, and how she had looked at his daughter, not as a rich man's child, but as a little girl learning how to hope again. He couldn't let the story end with silence. The next evening, rain poured over London, slicking the cobblestones in gold reflections. Helen was wiping down her counter when the doorbell rang. She looked up and froze. Nicholas stood there, rain-soaked, holding something small and fragile in his hand. He stepped inside, said nothing, and placed it gently on the counter. It was the drawing. Amelia's picture, taped, repaired, edges uneven but whole again. Helen stared at it, her breath catching. You kept it? She whispered. Nicholas nodded. She did. I only carried it here. He hesitated, then added softly, "She said it was broken, and she wanted it whole again." Helen traced the lines with trembling fingers. The tiny hearts, the messy tape, the word Helen still visible under the smudges. Her throat burned. "I never meant to hurt her." "I know," Nicholas said quietly. "But you didn't just heal her, Helen. You healed something in me too. And I can't let that disappear." For a moment, there was only the sound of rain tapping against the window, slow and steady. Then Helen lifted her eyes to meet his, and the distance between them finally broke. The bell above the bakery door jingled softly as Nicholas closed it behind him. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and shimmering. He stood there, dripping onto the tiles, eyes fixed on Helen. She hadn't moved, just stood at the counter, one hand still resting on the taped drawing. For a long moment neither spoke. The air between them carried all the words they hadn't said: fear, longing, forgiveness. Finally, Nicholas broke the silence. "Amelia misses you." Helen's eyes glistened. "I miss her too." He stepped closer, his voice lower now. "She needs you, Helen, and I think so do I." It wasn't a grand declaration, no dramatic music, no audience, just the truth, plain and steady. Helen swallowed hard, tears clinging to her lashes. "You don't need someone like me. I'm not part of your world, Nicholas." He gave a small, tired smile. "Then maybe I need a new world." Something inside her cracked open. Slowly she reached for the drawing again. Father, mother, child, 3 uneven figures holding hands. "She drew this before she could speak," Helen whispered. "Maybe she already knew what we were too afraid to see." Nicholas didn't answer. He simply held out his hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. Weeks later, the bakery was alive with laughter. Balloons hung in the window, ribbons fluttered in the warm breeze. It was Amelia's 5th birthday. No photographers, no luxury guests, just neighbors, school friends, and the smell of cake baking in the back. Helen wore a pale blue dress, her hair pinned up with a silver clip Amelia had given her. Nicholas was by the grill outside, sleeves rolled up, laughing like a man who had learned how again. Amelia, meanwhile, stood in the middle of the garden, clutching a small lopsided cupcake she had decorated herself. She spotted Helen by the drinks table and ran over, her curls bouncing. "Did you make that one all by yourself?" Helen asked, kneeling down. Amelia nodded, proud. "With Daddy." She offered the cupcake with both hands. "It's for you." Helen smiled, her throat tightening. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's beautiful." Before she could say more, a hush fell over the garden. Everyone turned. Amelia was staring up at Helen, eyes bright, mouth trembling. Then, clear and certain, she spoke the word that neither of them would ever forget. "Mummy." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Helen's hand flew to her mouth. Nicholas froze where he stood, the spatula still in his hand. The child's voice trembled again, softer this time. "Please don't go, Mummy." Tears burst from Helen's eyes as she knelt, pulling Amelia into her arms. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered through her laughter and sobs. "I'm not going anywhere." Nicholas turned away for a second, brushing his sleeve across his eyes. There were no speeches, no music, just truth. In that moment, family wasn't a word written on paper. It was the sound of a child's voice calling someone home. The morning sun spilled through the bakery windows, turning every dust mote into gold. The smell of sugar, butter, and warm dough filled the air, a scent that felt like belonging. Helen straightened the small flower arrangement by the register and smiled. The old sign that once read Marsh and Daughters Bakery was gone. In its place, hand-painted in soft cream letters, stood the words, "Today, we bake for love." It was her wedding day. Not in a church, not in a ballroom, but right here, between the ovens, the wooden tables, and the memories baked into the walls. The guests were neighbors, friends, and a few faces from the community who had watched her story unfold like something out of a quiet miracle. Helen wore a simple ivory dress trimmed with lace, her hair pinned loosely, a touch of flower still on her wrist, a detail Nicholas would later call perfectly her. He stood at the end of the aisle, no tie, just an open collar, and that calm smile that had once seemed impossible. Between them, holding a tiny bouquet of daisies, was Amelia. Her white dress fluttered as she grinned, whispering to everyone who would listen, "Mommy looks like sugar clouds." The ceremony was short, but every word landed like truth. When Nicholas slid the ring onto Helen's trembling hand, he leaned close and whispered, "I'm still glad you were the wrong woman that night." Helen laughed softly, tears in her eyes. "Me too." The guests applauded as he kissed her. Not the kind of kiss meant for cameras, but one that sealed a promise quietly, tenderly. Later, as the afternoon light mellowed into gold, the bakery buzzed with laughter. Children licked icing from their fingers, neighbors danced between tables, and Amelia sat proudly on a stool behind the counter, helping serve her guests. Chocolate smeared her cheeks, and she didn't care. Helen watched her, her heart swelling. Nicholas came up behind her, resting a flour-dusted hand on her shoulder. "You realize," he murmured, "we're a complete mess." "The best kind," she replied. Above the counter hung a new drawing, Amelia's latest masterpiece. 3 stick figures again, hand in hand, with a red heart floating above them. Beneath it, in uneven letters, she had written, "Mommy, Daddy, and me, forever." Helen leaned her head against Nicholas's shoulder. Outside, the evening settled softly over London, the bakery windows glowing like lanterns. Inside, laughter mingled with the rhythm of the heartbeat she had thought she'd lost. Sometimes, Helen thought, love doesn't arrive with fireworks. It walks in quietly, carrying rain and second chances, and asks if you'd like to stay. And she had stayed. As the last guests left and Nicholas locked the door, Helen turned the open sign to closed and smiled at the reflection of her family in the glass. A simple life, a sweet life, the right kind of wrong beginning. "The best recipe I ever had," she whispered. And somewhere beyond the window, the city kept moving. But inside, for one small bakery and 3 hearts, time stood still.